This is a demonstration of some of the features and workflow of Sierra Summit version 3.1 with UltraSound. When you first open the software, you're going to see our home screen. In the home screen, I have it displayed in a patient view. The patient view allows you to see all the patients in this window, and then when you select a patient, you'll see the studies that have been done on that patient in this window here. You can filter through your patient list with these tabs. You can set up custom tabs to filter however you'd like. You can go to the search tab to find any specific patient. If you're using our CAD-Link with HL7 interface, you can have it so when the patient checks in, the patient automatically shows up on the Cadwell Summit software. So all you have to do is select the patient's name and select new study. I'm going to start a new patient here from scratch. And we'll just put in patient information. Now with the Sierra Summit, you're actually building the report right from the beginning. So just put in the information here that you actually want to show up in the report. So we'll put in a birth date, height, and you can have these default to centimeters or inches, whatever you like. Here you can have, when you drop down, you can have different physicians already set up here. Same thing with referring physicians and technicians. Right from the start here, though, with patient complaints, medications, these are all custom fields that we'd set up for you based on your report in the template, in the format of your report. But right from here, you can start accessing our template feature, where rather than having to type in something, you can just select the hyperlink here and select, for example, in this case, maybe they presented with numbness and tingling in the right hand, for example. You can select medications, patient history and exam, same thing here, you can type in, or you can select patient history and exam. So for example, let's just say they have no allergies, no surgical history, no past medical history, and then if you wanted to, you could have sections in here, and again, this is customizable to how you would write your report, but you can have physical exam sections in here as well. So for example, you can select functional history, and let's just say the patient is independent, manual muscle testing history, just say 5-5 bilaterally, and so you can kind of set these up whatever makes sense for you. And then, of course, impression and recommendation, we'll fill that in at the end. So now we're just going to go to New Study. And this launches us right into our Navigator. The Navigator is how we get from test to test within the Sierra Summit software. I have it set to start in the Studies tab because I think it's a nice workflow to have some studies set up, kind of the things you do most often. So for example, a carpal tunnel workup or a lumbar and disc workup. And in those studies, for example here, you could have the nerves, muscles, and ultrasound sites that you typically test for that particular study. If you want to select something just one at a time, you can go to the muscles list and select a region and a muscle, or you can go to the nerves list and select a specific nerve, filtering by region or nerve, or ultrasound as well. But we're going to start with a study, and we'll just start with carpal tunnel. If I can click on a specific nerve in the study to start, or if I just double click on carpal tunnel, it takes me right into that study, and it adds that study, or all the tests in that study, to my study window. So these are the tests that I'm going to be doing for this patient. Just because it's here doesn't mean I have to do it. I can easily skip over something, and I can also add to this on the fly. So we're showing the new NCS Plus nerve conduction software right now, and the way this works is we've really tried to make something simple and intuitive, but with a lot of features in the background as needed to kind of fit different people's workflows. So I'm just going to test a couple of nerves here just to kind of show you the flow of the software. So I have it set to start with a median motor, and so here I can see the nerve I'm on, median motor. I have already the sites that I typically test set up here in the trace window, so I'm going to test a wrist site and an elbow site. I can do almost the entire nerve conduction test with the stimulator without having to really touch the base unit. So if you're away from the system or across the table, you can really complete the nerve conduction study without having to touch the base unit. When you look at your StimTroller, you'll see different buttons. You'll see ones that are labeled Stimulate and Store. And then you'll see buttons 1, 2, and 3, and then a plus minus button. The plus minus button just reverses the polarity from one side to the other. So the light is the cathode. The 1, 2, and 3 buttons are programmable, so that you can really use those however you want, so you can make the most out of the shortcut keys on the stimulator. I'm going to change this. We can see what they do here. So stim 1, stim 2, and stim 3. I'm actually going to change stim 3 from pulse width to trace history, just to show you that it's pretty easy to make a change to this. So we're going to change this to history. And then if we want to make that a default change, all we have to do is edit save test parameters. Now we've gone and we're ready to test. So I put on my electrodes and I'm just going to start stimulating. So I'm going to stimulate the wrist here. That's the side I'm on. And we have something called trace or glowing feature. What this is it's actually showing you the trace history as you stimulate, and it slowly fades away into the background, so you can make sure you're getting a super maximal stimulation. We also have a feature called hold max or hold M max, and that's actually toggled on and off with the F1 key. So these function keys down here at the bottom correspond with the F keys on your base unit, and these knobs correspond with the knobs on your base unit. So most of the functions that you need will be found here. You'll see F1 is enabled by default. What that means is now if I want to move my stimulator a little bit to see if I can get a better response from a different location, and I stimulate, if it's not a better response, it just keeps my best response, not my last response. So hold M max is telling it to keep the best or the biggest amplitude response versus the last response. So that actually ends up saving you quite a few clicks because you don't have to go through and re-stimulate. Now if I do want a previous response, I can always push F1 and toggle that off, and then it's always going to keep the last response. Or I can hit trace history, which is either the F4 key on the base unit, or I've set it up so the 3 key on my stimulator brings up the trace history, and you can see it right here below the sight, and I can just roll the wheel on the stim controller to pick the trace that I like the best. So let's just say I like this trace the best, so I'm going to hit store, and that's the trace it's going to keep. Store is your trace down function. It takes you from the site you're on, or the site down, so it takes you the site you're on to the next site. In this case it was elbow, so now we're ready to go to the elbow. We're going to stimulate the elbow, get a super maximal response. I have it set to keep the response that I want. Now if I want to compare those sites or those traces, I can hit F2, and that puts them on top of each other. Pushing F2 again overlays them right on top so I can compare amplitude and morphology of those two responses. To put in the distance, I can just type in the distance from the keypad. The numbers on the keypad are always set to type in distance when you're doing nerve conduction. Or right from the stim controller, I can hit the number 1 key, which brings up this distance window, and I can just roll the wheel to the distance that I measured. And what's nice about this is I can actually see the velocity as I move up the distance. Once you're happy, you can just hit store or the 1 key again to enter that distance. And now we're finished with this test, or with this particular test. If we want to adjust cursors, we can do that with the pink knob, just by pushing the pink knob to select the cursor and turning the pink knob to adjust the cursor. You can also do that with your mouse, just click and drag with the mouse. The green bar that you're seeing here when we move cursors is actually just graphically showing our reference value on the screen. So if we look over here, we actually have reference values currently set up based on the latest AANEM reference value recommendations using age and BMI, some other factors. So based on what demographics you put in, it'll adjust the reference value for you. So here we're looking for less than 4.7, and if I hover over here or if I change the cursor, I can see that represented in the trace window. If I want to look further out on this sweep to see any other responses, I can just click here and drag out and see further out on the response sweep. And notice my knobs are set up so if I do want to test things from the base unit, the yellow knob is intensity, and then you push it down to stim. The pink knob is to adjust cursors, and the blue knob is to adjust gain, or toggle it down, push down to adjust sweep. So I'm happy with this response. I'm just going to hit next nerve. I can either do that on the base unit by hitting next, or I can use it on right there from the stim controller by hitting the number 2 key, which I've set up for next. or I can use my mouse. So there's usually 2 or 3 ways to do anything. So what you want to do is just you can pick what works best for your workflow. So I'm using the stimtroller for this entire exam. So I'm going to hit number 2. That takes me to my F wave. It's kept my intensity where I left it. So now I can just go ahead and stimulate some F waves. I have it set up to overlay all of them as well as keep them rastered so I can have an easy comparison. And then if I want to adjust my cursor, I just use the pink knob to adjust that, or I can just click and drag it with my mouse. If I want to delete something, on the stimtroller I've set up the 3 key to delete the last one, just the last one I did, or you can just hit delete all to delete all the F traces. If you did that on accident, pushing the delete button again on the bass unit brings them all back. You can also go through and just highlight and right click and just delete the one trace that you're seeing there. I'm going to go to next nerve now, so number 2 on the bass unit, and take me right into the ulnar motor. And this one I'm going to jump through without too much narrative, just to kind of show you the flow here. So again, I have my sights here that I'm going to stimulate. You notice I have an eye up here, and if it's hard to see that, I can change the cogwheels in any window, or is how we change the settings in that particular window, so I can change the font size here if I want to. So this eye means that there's additional sights set up for this test that are hidden, meaning I may not do them that often. So clicking the eye shows those hidden sights. If I don't need to do those sights, I can click the eye again and it hides them. You can always add a sight on the fly just by hitting the insert sight, and then all you have to do is click that button, select the sight that you want to insert, the stim sight you want to insert, or you can just click here and type any sight to insert and hit OK, and that'll give me a something on the fly to insert. But I'm just going to test the ulnar motor. So here I'm from the stimtroller, I'm stimulating, finding my supermaximal response, and we'll store once we're happy with it, which takes me to the below elbow. I'll stimulate the below elbow and store, and then above elbow. And then we'll enter our distance either with the stimtroller or the number pad. With the number pad, you just type in the number and hit enter, and then type in the next distance and hit enter. Adjust cursors as needed, and then we're going to go to the next test by hitting the number 2 key on the stimtroller or the next button on the bass unit, and that takes me right into the F wave. And then we'll go ahead and get an F wave on here, and it remembers the intensity from where you found the initial wrist stimulation. So I'm happy with those F waves. Adjust the cursor a little bit here, and then I'm going to go into next test, which takes me right into my sensory tests. And here I can use my cursors and get a sensory exam. Now, with the sensory tests, there's another feature we have, which is improve. So F1 is set to actually improve the trace. And what this is going to do is, if you have kind of like you see here, I'm not in a very clean environment, so we have a little 60 cycle noise, or maybe you have a large stim artifact that's affecting your baseline. The F1 button is just going to subtract any slow wave from your baseline and flatten out your response, which should give you a more accurate measurement of the amplitude, and just give you a cleaner visual of your response. So F1 you can toggle on and off as needed. You don't really want to use it unless you actually do have a problem. So if you do have a slanted baseline or it's hard to read the sensory, sometimes the F1 key will help you better measure that response. If you didn't feel like there was a response, F3 just turns off the cursors and marks that test as no response. To turn the cursors back on, all you have to do is click in the order of the cursors, so always the first cursor, second cursor, and there we have the responses. The cursors that we're using are based on how the results table is set up. So we can set up the results table however we want. Whatever measurements we have shown on the results table, we'll have cursors for those measurements. So for example, if I had a negative duration measurement set up in my results table, I would see a third cursor on the screen. Or if I wanted to see a peak-to-peak amplitude instead of onset to peak, I could have that set up in the results table, and then I would see a cursor on the positive peak, so we could measure peak-to-peak. So it's actually very flexible and easy to set up the results table however you'd like, with whatever measurements you want to have in there. So I'm done with the sensory response, and let's just say I wanted to pick a different trace. So I can hit my number 3 key, which I've set up for history, or the F4 key on the bass unit, and that brings up my trace history. And you you can see here right below the trace. I can hover those over with my mouse, but since I did it with my stimulator, I can just roll the stim wheel and find the trace that I like the best. And in this case, let's just say I like that a little bit better, so I'm just going to hit store, and that's the one it keeps. If I want to average the sensory response, there's an average button on the base unit. I can just click average, and now it starts averaging. However, if I just go to trace history and open the trace history first, and then push average, then I can actually average after the fact. So what it did, you'll notice when I turn average on, it turns those radio buttons into checkboxes. And now I can actually select more than one trace, and it's just going to average any of them that I selected to each other. So that pink line is my average trace. And I can also undo averages. I'm going to turn the averager off. So then if you're happy with that, I'm just going to delete this trace altogether and show you one other thing here. So here I'm going to start stimulating. Now I want to start averaging, so all I have to do is turn the averager on. And now it's going to start averaging. And if there's one I want to take away from the average, I can just come over and find it. Let's say I don't want to include that one, and take that off, and take that off. So it's pretty easy to average responses as well with CR Summit. There's a few other ways you can set up this trace window. One thing that's nice is if you want to quickly see everything you've done, you can click on All Tests. Or in this case, I've actually set up my View 2, so you have different views you can set up. I've set up my View 2 to automatically default to All Tests and show me a little bit more simplified results table. So I'm going to hit the View button on the base unit, and now I can see all the different traces that I've stimulated. But more importantly, I can just quickly see what I've tested in a little bit easier to read window to see, here's my median motor, my ulnar motor, and my sensory sites. And I can just go back to view 1 to go back to my regular view. So you can toggle and have different views set up for looking at the information in different ways. I'm going to go ahead and do an ulnar sensory really quick here with less narrative, so you can see kind of how easy it is to set up this workflow. So I'm hitting number 2 to take me to the ulnar sensory, doing all this with the stim controller, and getting a response that I like. I'm happy with that. I'm getting a little muscle artifact there. I should have moved my electrode up a little bit. But so we're happy with that. So now we're going to go ahead and store that. We actually don't have to store it unless we add another site. You'll notice I have hidden sites here, so I'm going to unhide those sites, and now I can do additional sites. So I'm going to store that, and let's say we wanted to do a below elbow sensory for this patient, and above elbow sensory. There you go. We can change our sweep out here to look further out, or we can actually adjust the sweep and the gain here. If we wanted to put a distance in for those second sites, we can use the stim controller to hit the distance button, turn the distance to what we measured. So below the wrist, let's just say that was 20. And then again, above to below, let's just say that was 10. So that's kind of your typical workflow for nerve conduction studies. I'm going to go pick another nerve test, so one that's not on my list here. So for that, I'm going to go to Navigator, and I'm just going to pick here. We can filter through these by nerve or by region, but let's just say I want to do a combination test. So just to show what you can do, you can actually set up tests that have different test types in the same trace window. So I'm going to do a combination median with F wave, and this one I'm going to do on the left-hand side since I haven't tested that yet. So in this test, I've set it up for median wrist, and then it goes right to the F wrist, and then the median elbow. So this is actually nice if you do F waves commonly, because you don't have to move in your stimulator. You can just do the whole thing with a lot less clicks and without having to refine the stim plug. So I'm going to stimulate the wrist, get my super maximal response. Once I have that, I'm going to store, and that takes me right to the F wave. If I don't want to do the F wave, I can just hit store again and skip over it. But I'm going to go ahead and do the F wave for this one. So there I can see the F wave right below the motor response. And now I'm going to store, and that's going to take me down to the elbow, which actually pushes the F wave down below, and then I'll get my elbow response for the median. Oops, it slid off there. I'm not using gel, so if you move that's the stimulator when you're not using gel a lot while you're stimulating, it's just going to give you a warning that it doesn't want to overstim. So it's just a kind of a warning telling you it didn't stimulate because it's your impedance was changing quite a bit during the stimulation. So there's your elbow response and your F wave all in one trace window, and we can see all our results here. We can hit the one button and enter in the distance that we measured, and then we're done. So you can see you can set up trace tests in a lot of different ways to kind of improve your efficiency and workflow. You can even set up a 2-channel test so you can simulate at the wrist and get both a motor and sensory response at the same time. So there's a lot of different things you can do with NCS Plus software. I'm going to move on to UltraSound. So what we've done here is we've really integrated the UltraSound software and hardware into the Sierra Summit system so that we have an integrated workflow. You have integrated controls, so you're using the same controls in the base unit for nerve conduction, EMG, and ultrasound. Obviously integrated software, and then also integrated reports so that your EMG, nerve conduction, ultrasound information and the images in the ultrasound can all be integrated into the same report for reporting. So the ultrasound, we have a few things to make it kind of efficient and directed towards neuromuscular ultrasound. So I'm just going to do a couple quick scans of my median nerve and just show you how to measure a median nerve. So all I have to do here is switch. So I had it right in my study window, so when I was in nerve conduction, all it takes to go into ultrasound is just pick ultrasound. If you didn't have it in your study, you could go to your navigator, F7, and bring in some ultrasound sites. When I pick an ultrasound site, it's associated with a preset, so the image is preset for the best settings for that particular structure, in this case a nerve. So now I'm going to look at the median nerve. I'm actually going to measure it. So here's, if I look here, I'm going to put the mouse in the middle so you can kind of see what I'm looking at. So this doesn't record very well with a screen record, but you can see right there, that's the median nerve right under the mouse. Okay, but I want to measure that and do a ratio between the forearm and the wrist. So I'm going to push F3 on the base unit, which is going to give me a split screen, and then I'm going to find the nerve in the wrist first. There it is right there. And then I'm going to store it. So what I'm going to do is just stop, and then I can use the yellow knob just like nerve conduction to go find my best image of that nerve. It's pretty good right there. And then I'm going to hit F3 to toggle to the right side of the screen and run there. And then I'm going to find that same nerve, but follow it down into the forearm. So let's just say, that looks pretty good. So we'll stop that, and I can roll back with the yellow knob to find my best image. That's pretty good there. And now all I have to do is measure it. So I have this AB ratio, which makes it really easy to make a ratio measurement. So I'm just going to click that button, and I'm going to click on my wrist, click once, and then trace the outline of the nerve. And then click over in the forearm measurement and trace the outline of the nerve there. And so there it gave me the measurement for my wrist and my forearm, and then the ratio is 1.04. Now this is showing me the perimeter too. I can just turn that off. So if I only care about area, next time I measure, it'll only give me the area measurement. The P was giving me the circumference difference, but in this case, this is my ratio here, 1.04. And then all I have to do is hit store in the base unit, and it stores that image. And if I want to, I can have this pop up to put a comment for that image. And I'm going to, and I've already put a comment in that's saved in there, so I'm going to put wrist to forearm as a comment and hit OK. And now this image is going to show up in my report. If I want to do any more scanning, I can go back to Run Live. F1 takes me back to my regular B mode. If I want to look for Doppler, F5 will take me to Doppler, and I have a Doppler mode where I can scan for Doppler. So all those features are there ready to go. And then if you want to bring in Any other images, you just stop and store. You can save cine or video clips. So just by running, I want to look at like mobility of the nerve, I can go there and look at, see if the nerve is moving around along with the tendons. And then I can just save that video clip by pausing and then coming down to the save button and doing a cine quick save, and that saves that video clip. You can use a comment for that, and it's the video clip's just going to be saved to the patient record right along with the images. You can also export. You can, using a save as for the image or the cine, you can export these and save them as files that can be used in PowerPoint presentation. So the UltraSound software is very easy to use, and it really becomes part of your electrodiagnostic study because of the integration to the software. To move on from UltraSound to EMG, all we have to do is go to our study window and select the first muscle that we want to test. Because we had the muscles already in our study list, they're ready to go. So when we pick a muscle, it assumes we're going to test that muscle, so it puts a check by it, meaning that muscle's been tested. If we want to add other muscles, we can just hit the navigator, and that brings us right back into our full muscle list where we can filter through the list. You can look at all or common, and then pick the muscle you want to add. So with EMG, I'm going to actually bring in some pre-recorded data just to make it easier to demonstrate a little bit. So let's just, so with EMG, we're trying to do a few different things here. Most important thing is the audio. I have the audio muted because it's hard to hear over the sound, but with the audio, we have two high-quality speakers on the Sierra Summit with HD sound, and you can actually go into View Audio Equalizer and actually adjust the sound, or how those fibs and positive sharp waves and motor units sound. So you really have full control over what the sound of the system is like, and that can be very important because every system uses different speakers. It's going to sound a little bit different, so the equalizer really allows you to customize the sound of your EMG. Second, we want to make sure that the image is clear and consistent. So you have full control over the background grid, over how the image is displayed. When we hit stop, you can pause, and you'll notice down here at the bottom this is a buffer. So I'm going to run again, and you'll see that this is our buffer, what we've been running so far. I have it currently set to a 60-second buffer. You can make that longer or shorter, but anytime you can just stop, and then with the yellow knob I can review back through what I've recorded. If I want to play it back, I can just push the yellow knob and play it back for a second and then review back, so I can play something back very easily, and then I can hit run stop again to go back into live mode. If I want to store that actual buffer to look at later, just pushing the store button on my base unit is going to store that buffer. When I pause it and go back, if I want to store an image for my report, I can just click the camera button here, and that'll take a snapshot of the image for my report. And now I can go back into live. In EMG Plus, we have 4 different modes: spontaneous, volitional, auto-mup, and interference pattern analysis. So you can keep this as simple as you want, but you can also add in some quantitative data for those cases where you may be uncertain of the diagnosis. So each mode has 2 views. So spontaneous mode, I'm in view 1. You can see that up here. View 1, you can click that with your mouse, or there's a view button on your base unit. In view 2, in spontaneous mode, brings me into this where I have, I'm going to turn the gain down just with the blue knob, where I have a trigger running. It's an auto trigger, so it's trying to isolate the largest trace that shows up on the screen there. And then I have some trigger trace windows here that's showing me what the last few things that were triggered on the baseline. So in spontaneous mode, you can toggle back and forth between view 1 and view 2, and you can customize these views to look however you'd like. Volitional mode, push F2. Volitional mode, here we start bringing in some quantified data. So what we're doing in volitional mode, and this is again optional, but I have the trigger turned on as a default. If you don't want to use the trigger, you can turn it off and just use this as a quick way to jump between maybe 2 different gain settings or 2 different gain and sweep settings for looking at spontaneous activity versus volitional activity. But what I'm showing here is how you can immediately see some quantified data while the needle's in the patient. So we're just trying to we're trying to display as much information as we can while the needle is in the patient, while the patient is in the room, so you can make decisions on your investigation based on as much information as possible. So here we're running with the yellow triggers running in auto again, so it's trying to isolate the largest motor unit, and then over on the right we're seeing that motor unit that's being triggered on, along with some immediate measurements, amplitude, duration, and rise time in this case. I can actually click on that on these windows, and maybe I want to see firing rate instead of rise time. I can change that, so now I'm seeing amplitude, duration, and firing rate. So there's quite a bit you can see just live while the patient's still there without any post-analysis, just while the needle's in the patient and looking at a triggered waveform. There's some options. You'll notice in most of our windows we have a cogwheel. The cogwheel is how we set up those windows. So when I go into this window, there's some other options you can turn off if you want to see like a rise time histogram or an intensity bar. Now you can kind of see the rise time and the intensity of the motor units that are firing and the baseline. So there's quite a few options you can do depending on your workflow. If I stop the recording and just move the trigger off, I can scroll back and just drag through this gray area, and I can scroll through the buffer and see all of the different things that I've recorded. If I want to look at a specific motor unit, all I have to do is click on that motor unit, or I can either highlight over it, or I can draw a box around it, whatever you'd like. And what that did is over on the right hand window, I'm going to hit plus here because I want to keep this. So what it did is over on the right, it went through the buffer and it found all the motor units that looked like that motor unit. In this case, it found 500. And then it averaged some of those to give us a nice average trace. You have control over how it averages them. You can also display, right now we're overlaying all of them, which is nice if you want to exclude some of this erroneous or data that may affect the actual numbers. You can show this as a raster view. What I did there, and I can adjust how it's displayed here. So here I'm seeing the motor unit that I selected here. This is the average of that motor unit, and these are all the components of that average. In the cogwheel, I can adjust the type of average, so it's using a weighted average, so it's trying to average the best replications of that motor unit, and you can pick how many of those traces that you want to include in your average. And then if I want to go look at another motor unit, here's another one. I can click that one, and just hit plus, and that's going to keep it. And now here's the statistics on this motor unit. Now if I go to view 2, I can see that I've already collected 2 motor units, and I can see the results of those 2 motor units. So I'm looking at all these different measurements for that particular muscle. This is probably more than most people ever want to see, so it's actually really easy to customize this to the information that you care about. So just clicking in this field here, you can turn off any of the things that maybe you don't care about as much. And same thing in the top field, you can turn off any of these fields that may be less important to you. So here we can see the MUP that was selected, which is the red one here, which is also displayed here and here. And then here we see all the MUPs, so the mean, standard deviation, max and min of these measurements for all the MUPs and for the non-polyphasic MUPs. And then we can see the percentage of the MUPs that were polyphasic. So this is a way to easily bring in MUPs as you're recording to measure if you want to do some MUP analysis or some quantification on that specific muscle. If you have reference values for it while you're running, you can actually see. So if I go to view 1, if I had reference values for this particular muscle, which I don't, while I'm running, these numbers would either be green or red, meaning that they're within normal or they're at normal range. But again, all this is just there if you need it, but it shouldn't be getting in your way or making your test any more complicated. It's just there if you need it. I'm going to move on to a couple other kind of ways to quantify your EMG data if you need it. And then the third mode here is F3. F3 is a way to do what you just saw, but totally automated and really hands-free. So with this, what we're going to do, I'm going to bring up a different buffer here to look at here. So with AutoMUP, what it's going to do is you just stick the needle and try to get the patient to give a little bit of effort so we can get motor units firing. And this mode is just going to automatically collect motor units. So you can see there it found 3 mode units in this buffer, and it automatically added them to the table. Then all you have to do is run again. You could readjust the needle. In this case, I'm going to demonstrate that by just picking a different buffer. So you just adjust the needle, and so again, all this can be hands-free. Just adjust the needle a little bit, and the software is going to pull in additional mode units from that new location of the needle. And it's trying its best to determine whether they are unique or not. So you'll notice it excluded a bunch of them that it thought were copies. And so now we've already picked out that quickly. We've picked up 7, 8 mode units. If there's some of these that we think are repeats, in this case I think there aren't, but let's just say one of these two we thought maybe this was a repeat of the same mode unit. All you have to do is right click on that, it turned it gray, and it excluded it from the results. Right clicking again brings it right back. Going into view 2 allows me to see all the mode units I've collected, and then I can see all the results either in a results table display or an amplitude versus duration plot or a histogram plot. So AutoMUP is just a way to easily collect MUPs from a specific muscle and then analyze those. And again, all this can be done during the recording without adding any extra time because it's all done live with the same software. The last function or mode in EMG Plus is interference pattern analysis. And this is just a way to actually look at the interference pattern of the EMG when you're doing recruitment. And for this, what we're going to do is I'm going to pick a different buffer that has a patient actually recruiting. And then we'll just play this buffer. So this mode, all you have to do is tell it to analyze, F5, and it's automatically plotting information in these different plots. So here as the patient, usually you have the patient go from relaxed to full recruitment, and it's pulling out epochs of data and plotting those epochs of data in these cloud plots. The green area is normal. So if it's within the green area, then it's considered normal for that muscle. If it's outside the green area, then it's abnormal, and it's either neuropathic or myopathic, depending on what side it is. So I'm going to go ahead and pause that. And here we can see, and again, this is all automated, so it's very easy to switch to F4 and have the patient recruit, and within a matter of seconds you have some quantitative data to really confirm what you're thinking as far as the diagnosis goes. You can hit store on this to store this data. If you don't want it, just hit delete, and it'll delete it out. So here what we see is amplitude turns over amplitude. So this is taking the different epochs of data and plotting them in a graph showing turns over amplitude. These two are just a breakdown of this one compared to the activity of the baseline. So we're seeing, in this case, we're seeing amplitude over activity, and here we're seeing turns over activity. So it's breaking this graph down and comparing it to actual baseline activity. So here it's very easy to see that in this particular run of data, it's trending neuropathic, and it's outside of the normal range for this muscle. And again, looking at the turns, it's also trending neuropathic, and it's a little bit outside of the range of the normal data. If I want to add that to my report, I can hit store, or you can just leave it as is. So that's EMG Plus, and the thing I'm going to show you muscle scoring in just a second here, but the thing I want to stress is that it's very easy to go. It's just a push of a button to go from really basic EMG to adding some quantification and getting some actual numbers of the EMG that you're seeing. So for most cases, all you really need is stick a needle and maybe listen. But in those cases where you want to get a little bit, you're maybe unsure on the diagnosis, just going into another mode, and you can see some immediate quantification of that data, whether you go into volitional mode or AutoMUP mode. We're making it really easy to get more data from the EMG screen. There's quite a few other features in EMG Plus I won't show at this point, but this is kind of the basics of it. Now, the most important thing, obviously, of what you're doing is your report. So as you're testing your EMG needles, the F6 key on the base unit will bring up the scoring window. So that pops up the scoring window, so as I'm testing, I can be scoring the muscles as I go. So in this case, I did the APB, and let's just say that we saw increased amplitude and reduced recruitment. So you can just pick the whatever, score those muscles however you want. This is all customizable, so you can decide which drop downs or which options you have for scoring the muscle. You can have it set up to either do a drop down like this for scoring, or the entry table is just a quicker way to score that muscle. If I tested more muscles on this patient, I can just go in here and add muscle and select the muscles that I tested and hit OK. So here's all the muscles that I've selected, and now I can go through and quickly score these muscles as well. Let's just add a few more here. Okay, so that's how the muscle scoring works. So at this point, we've tested nerve conduction, ultrasound, and EMG, and I'm going to go into our review screen to see everything we've done. So I'm going to hit Tab Data. That's a button on the base unit. And this takes me into a screen where I can quickly see everything I've tested in this patient. Right now I'm in EMG Plus, so I can see the muscles I've scored. And one thing we're doing just to, again, speed up the process of getting to your final goal, which is your report, if you want to, you can use our sentence generator. So in this case, what we're doing is we're turning your muscle scoring into a findings paragraph. So based on how you scored your muscles, it's telling you needle evaluation of the right APB muscles showed moderately increased spontaneous activity, increased motor unit amplitude, and diminished recruitment. So all this is done automatically, so you'll notice as I score a muscle here, it's adding those findings in sentence format here. You have full control over how this is written and the type of language it uses to write out these sentences just by going to sentence setup. Same thing with nerve conduction. If you look at a NCS Plus, here's all of our nerve conduction studies. Any abnormalities, it's noting here in the findings automatically based on the reference values that I'm using. So it's saying in this case, it showed that F motor was a decreased conduction velocity. So left median with F motor nerve showed decreased conduction velocity. So I'm going to go back and take a look at that. So I can go right into that nerve. Actually, it was the left one there. And I can, there's my conduction velocity right there. If I turn off the patient report, I can see, you just make sure the cursor's in the right spot. So here you can, depending on whether you select patient info or report, you can go through and look at individual traces and make sure you agree with the placement of the cursors, make sure the distances are entered in correctly, and then you can go ahead and continue on with your report from here. So clicking back here takes me back to my report. So from here I can do NCS Plus here, which shows me all my results, and then I can look at the results tables and then go ahead and fill in my impression and recommendations of my report. Ultrasound also, we can see the ultrasound image right here and make sure that we agree with what we measured. We can look at the ratio and note the ratio in our report right here, because it's right here to easily type in. So here we can type in impression, or again, we have these hyperlinks to our templates. So if we want to use a template rather than typing, we can just click impression, and let's just say this patient had carpal tunnel and it was severe in the right sensory motor components. And we can say maybe there's no evidence of other focal nerve entrapment, whatever. You can make a note of the ultrasound findings. In this case, I didn't have an auto sentence in there, but you could definitely have a selection here for the ultrasound findings. Or you can always just type them in here as well. You can add to any of these fields. Recommendations, same thing. And again, this is up to you what fields you show up here and how the report looks. I can add recommendations in here. Let's just say follow up to the referring physician and continue current management. So now I've finished my exam. I can go back and forth from here back into any specific test if I want to, or I can just look at that individual test by selecting it here. And then the last step is just to hit my favorite button on the base unit, which is going to take all this data and drop it into a Word document. And then if I have the CAD link with HL7 interface, I can actually have this sent onto the EMR to the patient chart. So the final report is going to show up in a Microsoft Word document. You can still change things and edit things from here. But the idea is it's pretty much done at this point, because starting from the very beginning of the exam, we were entering in patient information, demographics, getting test results, and at the end, entering in our impressions and recommendations. So we can format this however you'd like, but this is your overall kind of what we have set up right now is kind of the meat and potatoes on the first page. So you have your complaints, history, findings, impressions, recommendations. You can have a signature in here if you want, so it can be digitally signed. Then we have our findings in table format for nerve conductions, EMG, and then as you can see, our ultrasound images right here as well. You can see the measurements, the ratio, and then your waveforms. So that's your report. When you're done, you just hit finish, and it'll save that report, and you can close it right back, and you can either hit the new patients button here or the home button to take you right back into the home screen. And that is a brief demonstration of some of the workflow and features of Sierra Summit 3.1 with UltraSound.